I knew I wasn't wanted the moment I stepped inside. The air smelled of cinnamon and candles, but nothing warm lived in it. My daughter barely looked up from the kitchen. "Hey, Dad," she said, already walking away. No hug, no plate, no smile. I sat in the den while they finished prepping the Thanksgiving meal. I wasn't asked to help. I wasn't asked anything. I sat there like old furniture, present but forgotten. Then I heard it. From the next room, just past the half-closed door, my grandkids. "Is he seriously here again?" one snickered. "Like, what's he even gonna do? Fall asleep in the mashed potatoes?" Another voice, louder. "Dude doesn't even know what a turkey knife is. Watch him try to carve it and take his thumb off." They laughed hard. One of them added, "It's not like he was actually invited. Mom just didn't say no fast enough." My throat closed. I wanted to pretend I hadn't heard, but I did, every word. I stood up slowly, my legs heavier than usual. My daughter appeared just as I grabbed my coat. "Oh, you're heading out already." "I think I'll leave you all to it," I said. "You don't have to." "I wasn't on the list," I said, softer now. "No need to rearrange the chairs." She looked down, shame flickering across her face for a second, but only a second. "If anyone's listening, don't make the mistake I did. Don't spend your life building a table just to be denied a seat at it." I stepped outside into the biting cold. No one followed. No one called my name. I drove home in silence, the kind that presses into your ribs and stays there. Later that night, I sat at my kitchen table, the one with one chair, one fork, one faded placemat, and opened the drawer I hadn't touched in years. There it was. The key to the cabin. Brass cold, slightly bent. The place they all assumed would be theirs one day. The place I built with my bare hands. The place they now speak of like it's a future inheritance, not a living piece of my past. They didn't forget to invite me. They chose not to. There's a difference between being overlooked and being erased. I turned the key in my hand. It still had weight. I stared out the window at the city lights flickering like small, silent apologies. Something inside me tightened, then loosened. They think I'll leave it behind. But the cabin won't be waiting for them. The air was colder up there than I remembered. The cabin sat still, like it had been holding its breath since I last stepped inside. Dusk coated the windows. A bird's nest hung crooked over the porch light. I unlocked the door, the key stiff in the lock but obedient, like it still recognized my hand. Inside, everything was where I left it. The quilt on the back of the old rocking chair. The firewood stacked neatly, long since dried to bone. The photo of my wife on the mantel, smiling like she always knew something I didn't. I didn't cry. I just stood there, breathing in the silence. This cabin wasn't just lumber and nails. It was our memory box. We built it before the kids were born, before life got fast and cruel. Every beam carried our laughter, every floorboard a story. My fingers traced the carved initials on the banister, EJ and MJ, Ethan and Melissa, back when they were still learning to spell. I remember them giggling while I held the pocket knife steady, my daughter watching from the kitchen window. "We'll always come back here," she'd said. But always has a short memory, apparently. I knelt by the floorboard under the far corner bookshelf. It creaked the same way it used to. I lifted it gently, revealing the tin lockbox we kept for documents, insurance, birth certificates, the original cabin deed. I pulled it out and sat cross-legged on the rug, coughing from the dust. I opened it. The deed was there, yellowed but intact. Signed in my name, dated 33 years ago. The ink had faded slightly, but my signature was still strong. I flipped to the second page, clauses, notes, legal boilerplate. Then I saw it. Ownership may not be transferred nor gifted in whole or in part unless amended in writing by the legal owner. This agreement is not included in any living trust unless explicitly added. I blinked. I never added it to the trust. Not once. They talk like they own this place already, like it's just waiting to be claimed. But they don't. This isn't theirs. It never was. I sat still for a long time, the paper trembling lightly in my hand. My daughter's voice echoed in my mind. We'll always come back here with the kids. That cabin promise she made when her hair was still dark and her heart still soft. She broke that promise long ago. I rose slowly and returned the deed to the tin, locked it, slid it back beneath the board. I pressed the floorboard down firmly, letting the weight of it settle like truth. Then I stood in the middle of the room and looked around. The sunlight filtered through the dusty windows, catching floating particles like stars suspended mid-fall. It was mine. All of it. And they were never coming back. The week crept in quiet, colder than usual. Thanksgiving loomed like a memory I hadn't consented to relive. No call. No message. No invite. Just silence that pressed its elbows into my ribs and waited for me to say something first. So I did. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope the turkey's not too dry this year. That's all I wrote. Sent it to the family group chat. No punctuation, no expectations. Just a threadbare olive branch from someone who used to be part of the feast. I stared at the screen. No response. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Then the photo came. My daughter, her husband, the grandkids, lined up around a perfectly lit dining table in their city condo. Fancy dishes, gold trim, linen napkins folded like swans. Melissa had her wine glass lifted mid-toast, Ethan leaning in, eyes half closed in laughter. They weren't at the cabin. They hadn't even bothered with the pretense. And then the comments came in. From my grandson, "Can't wait till the old man hands over the keys for good law." Followed by my granddaughter, "FR, bag secured." My thumb hovered over the screen. I reread it again and again. Bag secured. They weren't ignoring me. They were counting down until I was dead. Suddenly, I wasn't just excluded. I was in the way, a walking delay, a legal inconvenience. I locked my phone and set it face down on the table. But the words stuck, clung to the walls of my chest like mold. They've already divvied up what they think is theirs. They're just waiting for my body to cooperate. I stood up, the floor creaking beneath my weight. Enough. I pulled out the filing drawer and thumbed through the folder labeled Estate and Cabin. My name on the tabs, my handwriting on the margins. I flipped past the tax assessments and insurance renewals and landed on the card I hadn't touched in 3 years. Helen R. Whitaker. Estate Law and Planning. I stared at her number. We hadn't spoken since I finalized the living will. Back when I still believed family meant something other than division of property. I dialed. "Hello," she answered, warm and sharp. "It's Richard Caldwell." A pause. "Richard, been a while." "I need to make some changes," I said, urgently. She didn't ask why. She just said, "Comin' Tuesday." I hung up. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. A dog barked 2 houses down. Somewhere a family laughed. But here in this apartment, no voices, no clatter of plates, no footsteps across hardwood. Just me and the faint buzz of a message I wouldn't reply to. They thought I was fadding. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Helen laid the papers flat across her desk, smoothing them with the edge of her palm like she was ironing out the past. "No amendments, no additions," she said, flipping the final page. "Richard, this deed stands alone. The cabin isn't in the trust. Your name's the only one on it." I nodded, though a part of me still needed to hear it again. "So they have no legal claim." "Not unless you give it to them," she said, eyes meeting mine. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I looked at the document. My signature from 33 years ago stared back, bold and steady. I remember signing it in the cold light of a snowy morning, my wife holding our daughter on her hip, both of them smiling like the cabin was our future. I've never been more sure. Helen leaned back. You could sell it quietly. No announcement. We'll handle it through a private brokerage. No one would know until the sale finalizes. Good, I said. I don't want fireworks, just finality. We shook hands. Hers was warm, mine not so much. On the drive home, I passed the same stretch of pine that led up to the cabin. Each tree felt like a silent witness, tall and tired. The kind of trees that remember who planted them, who bled for them. They don't know what that place cost me. Not the money, the years. My daughter once said she wanted to turn the cabin into a short-term rental, just for some side income, she said. It's just sitting there, Dad. Like it was a dusty lamp she planned to flip on Etsy. My grandkids have already picked out their bedrooms. But none of them have ever asked how it was built. That every log was cut by my hands. That we used leftover shingles from an old church roof to patch the first winter. That my wife sold her mother's jewelry to help pay for the foundation when we came up short. They see a cabin. I see a sacrifice. I got home and opened my laptop. Helen had already emailed the broker's contact. He specialized in discreet sales, high-demand mountain properties. The cabin was worth nearly $1.2 million in the current market, prime location, private land, decades of equity they never earned. I wrote a short message. List it privately, no signs, no family notifications. Then I hit send. The room was quiet, the only sound the slow tick of the old wall clock, ticking away in the home they never visit. They think they're waiting for their future. But the truth is, I just sold their past. The porch still groaned beneath my weight, same as it always had. I sat in the old rocking chair my wife once claimed as hers, a blanket over my knees, the morning air crisp enough to nip the skin. The birds chirped like they had no idea what was happening inside the cabin. Or maybe they did. The first buyers came on a Monday, a young couple, nervous, respectful. The woman ran her hand along the doorway like she was asking permission. The man took a deep breath when he stepped inside. Smells like my grandfather's place, he said and smiled. I didn't speak, just nodded. They didn't see me as the owner, just part of the furniture. That was fine. Later that week, a man came alone. Quiet, broad-shouldered, walking with a slight limp. He said he used to camp nearby when he was in the service. Said he'd always dreamed of a home with a wood-burning stove. He lingered by the fire pit. Said nothing for a long time. Just stood there with his hands in his coat pockets, eyes far off. Then came a woman with a baby no older than 6 months. She apologized for the crying. I told her not to. She rocked the child against her chest as she stood in the same kitchen where I used to make pancakes for Ethan, my grandson, when he was just a toddler in footy pajamas, clutching a plastic dinosaur. He doesn't remember those mornings. I do. Each visitor stepped over the threshold with reverence. None of them asked how much the place would rent for. None called it a weekend flip. They asked where the sun rose through the windows. They asked if the porch got quiet after dusk. They asked like it mattered. One afternoon, I stayed seated on the porch while a family came to look. 2 kids, giggling. The daughter spun in the open space near the fireplace. "Can we do Christmas here?" she asked. The father looked up at me. "You the owner?" I nodded. He smiled. "It's beautiful. You can feel the love in the walls." That time, the laughter didn't sting. It didn't echo like mockery. It warmed the wood. It made the place breathe again. They didn't know me, but they saw the cabin, really saw it. That evening, my phone rang. "Helen." "Got an offer," she said. "Full price, no contingencies, they're serious." I didn't hesitate. "Accepted." There was a pause. "You're sure?" I'm sure. I hung up and looked out past the porch rail, where the trees swayed gently under a fatting sky. The breeze carried the scent of pine and old smoke. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. This place was never meant to be a museum for ungrateful heirs. It was meant to be lived in. And now maybe it would be again. The phone rang on Christmas Eve, an unfamiliar number I still knew by heart. "Dad," my daughter's voice was bright, rehearsed, the kind of cheer you put on when there's something you want. "We were just talking about you. The kids thought maybe we could do a late Thanksgiving at the cabin. You know, start the new year together." I stayed quiet, let her fill the silence. She went on, words tumbling over themselves. "The grandkids are already planning their Instagram posts. They want to do one of those 3 generations under one roof shots. Isn't that sweet?" Sweet, that word had lost its flavor a long time ago. "I figured we'd come up next weekend," she continued. "You can open it up for us, right? We'll bring groceries, maybe cook together like old times. Melissa even said she'd bake your favorite pie." I could almost hear her smiling through the phone, picturing the photos, the captions, the comments about family legacy from friends who didn't know any better. "I won't be there," I said. She paused, the sound on the other end dimmed, just her breath catching. "What do you mean you won't be there? Dad, we're all coming up." "I won't be there," I repeated, "and neither will the cabin." Confusion flooded her voice. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You might want to check the mailbox," I said. There was a shuffle, the faint rustle of papers. A door opened, the sound of cold air, then the distant squeal of a mailbox hinge. "Hold on," she said, her voice fatting. A long minute passed. Then I heard it, the sound I'd been expecting, a gasp sharp enough to cut through static. "Dad," she whispered, "what is this?" I didn't answer. The paper crinkled against the phone. "You sold it. You sold our cabin." The words "our cabin" sat bitter on her tongue. I stared out my window at the snow falling under the streetlight, soft, endless, unbothered. "Yes," I said finally, just that one word. She started to say something. Anger, disbelief, excuses, maybe all three, but I never let it form. I hung up. The phone buzzed again a few seconds later, then again. I turned it face down on the table. The clock ticked softly in the corner, steady and merciless. Outside, a car door slammed, followed by muffled laughter from my neighbors, carrying food into their home. Families still existed somewhere, I supposed. I looked at the photo of the cabin one last time, the porch light glowing in twilight, the same light I replaced every year after my wife passed. They thought the cabin was waiting for them, but it had already found a better home. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone. The screenshots came in batches. My niece, bless her, didn't say much, just sent the images with a single message. "Thought you'd want to see this." I opened the first one, my granddaughter's name at the top. What the hell is wrong with him? He must be losing it. Who sells the family cabin right before the holidays? He didn't even tell us. No warning, no respect. Another image loaded. My grandson now. He's heartless, straight up, like actually sick. Imagine selling the place where we grew up for a quick buck. Where they grew up. Funny how they never showed up for it anymore. The last time either of them touched that front porch, they were still in braces and begging for Wi-Fi. Then my daughter chimed in. "He needs help. I think something's wrong. This isn't like him." That made me pause. Wasn't like me. They hadn't spoken to me in months, maybe longer. Thanksgiving came and went with nothing but laughter at my expense, but suddenly they're experts on who I am. I kept scrolling. One comment after another, piling up like dry leaves, loud, brittle, empty. Not one of them mentioned Thanksgiving. Not one of them mentioned the silence. They weren't mourning a person. They were grieving lost property. They hadn't lost me. They lost access. And now they were furious. I put the phone down for a moment. Let the room be still. The radiator hummed softly. Outside, someone was shoveling a walkway, metal scraping concrete in steady rhythm. I picked the phone back up, almost out of habit, and scrolled to the last screenshot. It was a shorter one. A single comment buried under the outrage, almost like it had been ignored. Did anyone even invite him? The typing indicator flickered under it. No one replied. Not one person answered. I stared at that for a long while, not because it surprised me, but because it was the only truth spoken in that entire avalanche of blame. I never got the invite. Never got the call. Never got the seat at the table. And now that the keys were gone, now that the locks had changed, now I was suddenly valuable again. I set the phone down and folded the screenshots neatly into the drawer beside my recliner, under the worn remote, and a book I kept meaning to finish. Their anger didn't burn. It didn't even warm the room. It just passed over me like cold wind through an open door. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to step outside and close it. They had spoken. Loudly. And in their silence. So had I. The gravel crunched beneath my tires like old bones as I pulled into the drive for the last time. The cabin stood just as it always had, weathered, proud, and silent. Only now it wasn't waiting for me. The new owner arrived shortly after. She stepped out of a modest hatchback wearing a thick wool coat and a nervous smile. Gray hair tied back in a bun, hands tucked deep in her pockets. "You must be Mr. Caldwell," she said softly. "I am." "I'm Ruth," she added. "Retired this year, taught English for 32 years. Her eyes swept over the porch, the beams, the chimney. "I used to bring my students poems about places like this. Never thought I'd own one." I handed her the keys. They felt light. She held them gently, like they might dissolve in her hands. "I can't thank you enough. I've wanted to start a writing retreat for women like me, quiet, overlooked, with stories still inside them." I gave a small nod. "Then it's going to the right person." She blinked quickly, wiping her eyes. "It's beautiful. You can feel the care in the walls." I didn't say anything to that, just turned and walked up the steps one last time. I stepped inside, the smell of pine and thyme still thick in the air. My footsteps echoed slightly in the emptiness. I moved to the mantel and took the photo from my coat pocket, the one of my wife standing barefoot on this porch, holding a mug and laughing at something I'd said. It wasn't framed, just a printout, slightly creased at the edges. I set it on the mantel, not as a memorial, not out of grief, but as a blessing. "Watch over her," I whispered. I locked the door behind me. The click sounded different this time, final, not secure. Ruth stood near the edge of the porch, arms folded. "If you ever want to visit," she said gently, "you'd always be welcome. It'll be a place for stories after all." I smiled faintly. I think I've told all the stories I needed to in that place. I didn't take the front path back to the car. Instead, I circled around the back, through the narrow trail lined with birch trees, the one no one ever bothered with. It wound gently downhill, hidden beneath years of fallen needles. My wife and I used to sneak out this way when the kids were little, stealing quiet moments alone while they napped. The trail greeted me like an old friend. The trees didn't seem angry, just quiet. Branches creaked overhead. A soft wind moved through them, not harsh, not cold. I didn't look back. The cabin had a new story now. And I had finally closed the last chapter of mine. The lawyer barely blinked when I told her what I wanted. "No family beneficiaries?" she asked, tapping her pen against the margin of the will draft. "None," I said, "not anymore." I watched her write, the soft scratch of the pen filling the room like a slow exhale. My hand stayed steady in my lap. The cabin was gone, the keys handed over, the doors locked behind me. Now it was time to seal the rest. I named 3 recipients. A veterans housing program, quiet men like me, who came back home but never quite landed. A local literacy fund, because my wife believed words could save people, even when nothing else could. And a charity that builds safe spaces for single mothers. We were never rich, but when we struggled, we knew what it meant to be seen. All of it, every dollar from the cabin sale, every cent not yet claimed by time or decay. Helen looked up from the paper. What about your family? I slid a folded page across the table. She opened it. There was only one line. Inheritance is not a right. It is a reflection of relationship. She read it again, then nodded. You want this added to all copies? Yes, right at the end. I left her office with sealed envelopes in my coat pocket. One for my daughter, one each for the grandkids. I mailed them without ceremony. No notes, no bitterness, just the truth signed and stamped. Weeks passed. No calls. No texts. No apology. Only silence. But this silence didn't ache the way it used to. It no longer pressed against my ribs or hovered over my bed like fog. It was a different kind of quiet, one I chose, one I earned. I walked to the park on a Sunday and sat by the bench with the plaque that read, "To those who carried more than their share." A few kids ran past. A couple walked their dog. I breathed. No one needed anything from me. No one waited with a hand out. At home, I reread the letter once more. That sentence especially. Inheritance is not a right. It is a reflection of relationship. They had every chance to love me while I was here, to remember that I was more than a signature waiting to expire. I folded the will and filed it into the drawer beside my bed. It no longer mattered if they ever read it. They had written their part in silence. Now I had written mine. And I didn't need to be remembered by those who forgot me while I was still breathing. The radiator hums low, steady, like a voice that doesn't ask to be heard, but fills the silence anyway. I sit in my little apartment, the one I moved to after selling the cabin. It's nothing grand, just 2 rooms and a balcony that overlooks a sleepy street, but it holds what matters. A few potted plants I remember to water, shelves lined with the books my wife loved to reread, framed photos of moments no one else seems to remember anymore. The kettle whistles. I pour the water, steep the tea. Robas, her favorite. I never liked it much, but the smell is enough to bring her back for a few seconds. I place the mug on the table. Across from me sits the old chair, the same one I brought from the cabin, scratched from years of elbows, rocking ever so slightly when the floor creaks. It used to be where my daughter sat, or my grandson, curled up with a blanket and a question. No one sits in it now. And I've made peace with that. I used to imagine I'd fill that chair again someday, holidays, visits, unexpected laughter, but hope like that becomes heavy. It bends the room, so I let it go. I didn't replace the chair. I let it stay empty, not out of sadness, out of respect. Absence, when acknowledged, can be sacred. I take a sip of tea, letting the warmth spread slow. No children, no grandchildren, but also no waiting. No reaching for the phone, hopping for a message. No scanning photos online to see if they still remember my face. No more sitting at the edge of someone else's celebration, wondering when I'll be let back in. This peace, it came the long way, through grief, through betrayal, through the fire of knowing that love, unreturned, must eventually be set down. I rise and stoke the small fire in the corner stove. It crackles softly, shadows flickering across the room. I raise my mug to the flames. Not in grief, but in quiet resolve. The stories we're taught as children end with reunion, embraces, apologies. But some stories don't end that way. Some end with a key turned in the lock, a deed signed, a photo placed on a mantle and left behind. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. Some end with release. And as the tea warms my chest and the fire hums like the radiator, I know this ending belongs to me. That empty chair isn't a wound anymore. It's a boundary, a reminder, a quiet kind of freedom.